Bruce here, new episode of Chordplay. This is the Chords of Spirit, and we're going to be talking about the late great guitar legend Randy California. And Spirit formed in Los Angeles, California in 1967 and exploded in popularity in the late 60s and early 70s, thanks in part to hit singles like I Got a Line on You, also the minor hit Nature's Way. But definitely they made a huge splash on the scene with music fans, but also with musicians. Notably, Jimmy Page was a huge Spirit fan. And also, there's a connection with Jimi Hendrix we're going to talk about in a second too. But there's an interesting, batch of music and an interesting batch, of history surrounding this group, Randy, and also the music of Spirit. So here we go. The original run of albums from Spirit from 1968 to 1970, they released 4 albums in that window of time. They temporarily broke up around 1971. Randy formed the Captain Copter and the Twirly Birds, or whatever that project was. That's a really trippy album. If you're a Hendrix fan, check that out. But then they reformed, and they continued to reform and release albums sporadically throughout the 70s to the 90s. But it's really interesting that the first Spirit album, the self-titled album, was released in 1968, and Randy was only 16 years old. He was 1 month away from his 17th birthday. So he was technically a kid. And I know for a fact, Jimmy Page loved that album, and Led Zeppelin used to play the song Fresh Garbage, during early medleys in Led Zeppelin's, concerts. So definitely their impact and their music was heard, even though technically, Randy was just a teenager, but that's really impressive. So if you go back even further in Randy's history, Randy actually met Jimi Hendrix through Manny's Music in New York City, and that was around 1966, and technically, Randy was 15 years old. He was, he hadn't had his birthday yet. And he actually started playing with Jimi Hendrix in Jimmy James and the Blue Flames. So that's before the Jimi Hendrix experience. And I read somewhere that Hendrix actually wanted Randy in his band. But then Chas Chandler from the Animals, who became Hendrix's, manager, he kind of pushed Randy out of the picture because he wanted Hendrix to be the only guitarist. And he wanted to kind of focus on that trio, almost like Cream. So it did kind of push Randy out of the picture, and then eventually Randy formed, Spirit. But it's really interesting to notice that history. And literally, Randy was Jimi Hendrix's, protege. So the music and chord-based ideas shared in this lesson came from 3 Spirit albums, and I mainly locked on to those classic albums, from the late 60s and early 70s. That includes their self-titled debut, The Family That Plays Together, also the album Clear. And I was going to dive a little bit deeper, but there's a lot of great guitar work and chord work on those albums, so I kind of got locked on to those early 3. So here we go. With the opening, that's the song Dark Eyed Woman from the album Clear, and there's 2 guitars there, and I was looping one of them with a TC Electronic Ditto looper. And the chord part, which is the second guitar part, is really just moving from B or B5 down to an A, G, up to A, and then end on B. So really basic, and that's what I was looping right there. And then you hear that lead part, and I really like the way that the chord progression behind the lead part, when the chords change, it kind of changes or mutates that solo or that melodic, statement. So the melody is like this. And think like B minor pentatonic right there. Bending that B note on the wound D string up a whole step and back, like that. So the first 2 passes, the last time, you're going to grab that E, bend that up a whole step, and kind of lazily release it, and then end on B minor right there. But then when you hear that combined with the other guitar, it's really cool the way it kind of changes and mutates the sound of that riff. Something like that. And then you hear it change, and then it's F sharp twice, a D to an E power chord like that. And then just start vamping on that B5 right there. And then do it again. And do that that F sharp, D, E to move, and then end on A. And do that same little chord hit again, and then end on G. Move up to A, and then end on B or B5. So it's very basic, but you have to think the album Clear came out in 1969. That was massively influential. That was literally the same year that Led Zeppelin kind of blew up. So that was revolutionary, pioneering, hearing power chord riffs and stuff like that. You know, in the late 60s, that influenced and inspired everybody. Next up is the song Fresh Garbage from the album Spirit, and this is the song that Led Zeppelin used to cover live, you know, back in 1969. And it has this Latin rock kind of groove like this. Kind of A minor based single note riff in the beginning, where you're grabbing that A octave and then this B note, which is the ninth of A, and then that G. So it's kind of loosely based around A minor 7, kind of A minor, because you're doing that A to A and then B to G right there, and then D to D, and then grabbing E to C, and then this little D, E, G, A hammer on right there. So really slowly. And repeat that 3 times. And then there's octaves right here. There's an A octave, and then E flat octave, and then E octave, and then a B flat octave. You know, really unusual, kind of mysterious. And then you do the riff again. Next up is the song It's All the Same. This comes from the album The Family That Plays Together, and it's this funked out riff like this. We're starting with this chromatic walk up on the A string, B, C, C sharp to D, and then you want to end with a G note right there. And you start scratching after that, and then do that walk up again. And the second time you want to end on the higher G octave right there, like this. So you're doing the first time, and the second time, and the third time, you're going to move up to this. Something like that. You can think of that a couple different ways. I'm viewing that like a D minor 11 right there, or a D minor add 11. Because we're really just playing D and F with the open G string. It's got that really different kind of flavor. You just move back to C major right there. And then end on that single G. And then you loop all that again. Then you start hearing this. So you're hitting this G root, which I think that's actually the bass, but I kind of throw that in there with the guitar too. And then you're hearing this kind of melody. So it's, you know, this F note with the open G, so kind of implied G7 right there. But we're doing this. So it's that open G with that F note, and then you're moving to E, and then you want to pull off to that D with that open G still kind of ringing in there. Like that, and then do it again. And the last time he's doing something like that. Kind of, you know, transparent riff. Kind of playing with that open G like that, but I like those drone riffs, and that's kind of unusual, but really cool. Next up is the very famous I Got a Line on You from the family that plays together, and I wasn't going to feature this mainly because it's Spirit's most popular song, but I did notice transcriptions online, some online tabs that were really wrong and filled out chords and, you know, really strange things going on in the tabs. But really, if you listen to the song, it's a guitar and a keyboard together. And the guitar is just playing octaves. You know, he's not playing chords. So I Got a Line on You's like this. What I think people are hearing is the keyboard, the guitar, and the bass together, and they're thinking of that as chords. And that's not what they're doing. I saw riffs like that's definitely not what's going on there. No, it's that really transparent octave. So it's not really chords. It's just a B octave and then F sharp to G sharp slid. And then you can do the B octave again, and then G sharp to F sharp. You know, do a slide down. And you hear that big, like, you know, G slide right there, and then a G octave, A octave, and then B. Next up is the song Free Spirit from the album Spirit, and it's this dreamy kind of cascading chord part. It's piano and guitar together, like this. So it starts way up here, and that's basically going to function as an E major 7 right here. And I'm kind of treating this almost like a kind of a bar workout right there, because I'm using my index for the root note, which eventually the piano is what you're hearing play those root notes, like that. But I just added that root note in there just to help you hear, you know, what key we're in. And it does kind of help define that chord, you know, pattern right there, because that's E major 7. You're going to move that 16th fret bar back to the 15th fret, and that's an implied E minor 7 flat 5 right there. And then right there, just bar the 14th fret from the D to the high E string. And you can think of that as an F sharp minor 7 over E right there. Because we're just moving down chromatically with that E root note. Like that. But it's played, you know, more like this. Everything you just did down a whole step. So now it's a D major 7 right here. Move that down a half step, and that's a D minor 7 flat 5 implied. And then E minor 7 over D, like that. Do that one again, it's repeated twice. And then we're going to move all the way down to A major 7. You're going to do it again right there. So there's A major 7, A minor 7 flat 5 implied. B minor 7 over A, like that. Repeat that one again. And then just end on this, you know, B minor 7 over A. You could even play the open A in there if you wanted to, the open A string. Like that. But that's a really interesting kind of just descending, dreamy, chord sequence. But I love stuff like that. It's unusual, it's kind of different. It does feel like you're floating around in the clouds or something. And it's just, kind of different. I like stuff like that. Last but not least, we're going to take a look at the song Taurus from the album Spirit. And definitely the awareness of this song has exploded in recent years thanks to the lawsuit that was filed against Led Zeppelin. Luckily, Zeppelin won that lawsuit and they kind of defended their music. And we did break this down actually in the I Love 60s Chordplay episode from a couple years ago. But now we're talking about Spirit, so I had to include this again. And once we break this down, you'll see it's similar to Stairway to Heaven, but it's not the same. And that's why Zeppelin won, because they didn't, directly copy it. I think Jimmy Page just kind of made a variation of it, which, as far as music and artistic freedom is concerned, variations are acceptable. It's direct copying that's a no-no. But Taurus is something like this. So it basically starts with this A minor add 9 right here. And then we're going to basically move this A note to a G sharp. And that's going to change it to an A minor major 9, like this. And then change that G sharp to a G right there. And that's going to be an A minor 7 add 9. And then change that G to an F sharp. And that's going to be an A minor 9 flat, or I'm sorry, an A minor 6 add 9. A minor 6 add 9, and then we're going to move that F sharp to an F, and then that's going to change it to an A minor 9 flat 6. And you hear that to start with, and then you hear this high A added right there, and that's still an A minor 9 flat 6. And then you hear an open D to A, and then you hear a hammer on from G to A, and it starts over again. Stairway to Heaven, you'll notice it's not the same. I mean, it's similar, but like I said earlier, I think Jimmy was inspired by Taurus. He didn't really rip it off. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of Spirit, and definitely kind of an overlooked or misunderstood band by most musicians these days. They definitely had a huge splash back in the late 60s and early 70s, and then they just kind of disappeared. I mean, they were still active into the 90s, but they never really, maintained that success they had in the late 60s. And I guess it was the reforming and disbanding and reforming and disbanding, maybe that kind of turned some music fans off, or they couldn't decide if they wanted to stick it out with this band that was kind of off and on like a light switch. But definitely Randy California, just the music history associated with him and his music is very inspiring and interesting. And I couldn't wait to learn more about him and the Hendrix connection and Led Zeppelin, connection years and years ago when I originally, kind of discovered him and dove into Spirit's music. And when I discovered how he died, it was shocking, because it's another rock and roll tragedy, but it's not an overdose or a plane crash or something that you're commonly, hearing from these rock stars. He was actually surfing with his son in Hawaii, and his son got caught in a rip current, and he dove in and pushed his son toward shore, but the rip current grabbed him and pulled him, out in the ocean, and they never recovered his body, so he drowned. And when I discovered that, I was like, oh man, that was in 1997, so long after Spirit's reign and, popularity. But when I read that, I was shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, that's very tragic. And it's sad, and I definitely wanted to put this together not only to kind of maintain or help push, his name and legacy out there, but also Spirit's music too. They have some great music. So if you're a blues rock fan or psychedelic, kind of late 60s rock fan, check out some Spirit. It's great stuff. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content material. Thank you.